In the vast expanse of the galaxy, where 1,000 different species had mastered faster-than-light travel, conquered diseases, and built cities that floated among the stars, there remained one simple human custom that baffled every alien civilization: the kiss. To the logical Zentari, it was an inefficient exchange of bacteria. To the telepathic Vorthak, it was primitive when minds could touch directly. To the energy-based Luminari, physical contact itself seemed crude and unnecessary. Across the known galaxy, kissing was universally regarded as the strangest, most pointless human ritual ever documented. But Dr. Zara Vex, the galaxy's most brilliant xenobiologist and a Zentari who prided herself on understanding every species she encountered, was about to discover that some human customs couldn't be understood through science alone. Sometimes the heart taught lessons that logic never could. What started as academic curiosity about human mating rituals would become something far more dangerous and far more beautiful than she ever imagined possible. Dr. Zara Vex pressed her scaled fingertips against the cool metal of the observation deck's railing, watching the human ship dock with their research station. The vessel was smaller than she expected, its design lacking the elegant curves of Zentari architecture or the crystalline perfection of Vorthak engineering. Instead, it possessed a strange functional beauty that spoke of a species more concerned with getting things done than making them pretty. Her violet eyes tracked the docking procedures with scientific interest. This would be her first time working directly with humans, despite having studied their biology for over a decade. The Galactic Research Consortium had finally approved joint studies between species, and she had volunteered immediately when she learned humans would be participating. The airlock hissed open, and Ambassador Kethvar of the Vorthak delegation approached her position. His tall, ethereal form seemed to glide rather than walk, and his large, opalescent eyes held the usual disdain that his telepathic species reserved for what they considered lesser beings. Dr. Vex, his voice resonated directly in her mind, bypassing her ears entirely. "I trust you're prepared for the disappointment that working with humans inevitably brings." Zara's jaw tightened. The Zentari were known for their logical approach to everything, but even her species' famous emotional control had limits when it came to Vorthak arrogance. "Ambassador, my research suggests that humans, while lacking our technological advantages, possess certain unique characteristics that could prove valuable to our understanding of evolutionary biology, such as their primitive mating displays." Kethvar's mental voice carried amusement. "I've heard they actually press their feeding orifices together. Quite disgusting, really." Before Zara could respond, a commotion near the docking bay drew their attention. The human delegation was emerging from their ship, and even from a distance, she could see they moved differently than any species she'd encountered. Where the Zentari calculated each movement and the Vorthak flowed with ethereal grace, humans seemed to move with contained energy, as if they were always ready to spring into action. Dr. Marcus Chen stepped into view first, his dark hair slightly disheveled from the journey. Zara had studied his research extensively. His groundbreaking work on interspecies genetic compatibility had earned him recognition across 3 star systems. What her studies hadn't prepared her for was the intensity in his brown eyes as he scanned the station, taking in every detail with obvious fascination. Behind him came Dr. Sarah Martinez, the team's cultural anthropologist, whose warm smile seemed to light up her entire face. Then Dr. James Wright, the linguist, who was already making notes on a datapad, probably documenting his first impressions of the station's design. Finally, Captain Alex Rodriguez brought up the rear, his military bearing evident in every step. "Fascinating," Zara murmured to herself, watching as the human team interacted with each other. They touched casually, hands on shoulders, brief contact that seemed to convey information and comfort simultaneously. It was behavior she'd read about but never witnessed firsthand. Ambassador Kethvar's mental sniff of disdain interrupted her observations. "Notice how they constantly need physical reassurance. So primitive." Station Administrator Qualeth, a fellow Zentari with chrome-colored scales and deep red eyes, glided over to join them. "The human delegation has requested a tour of our facilities before beginning research protocols." Dr. Vex, since you'll be their primary liaison, perhaps you should begin with introductions. Zara nodded, straightening her laboratory coat. She had prepared for this moment extensively, reviewing human social customs and communication protocols. Yet as she approached the human group, she felt an unexpected flutter of nervous energy in her stomach. It was illogical and unwelcome. "Welcome to Research Station Kepler 7, she said, her accent giving the standard galactic language a melodic quality that seemed to catch their attention. "I am Dr. Zara Vex, xenobiologist, and your assigned research partner for this mission." Dr. Chen stepped forward, and Zara was struck by how tall he was compared to her species' average height. He extended his hand in the human greeting gesture she had studied, and she reached out to clasp it in response. The contact was electric. His skin was warm, much warmer than her species, and the pressure of his grip conveyed strength tempered with gentleness. "Dr. Vex, it's an honor to meet you," Marcus said, his voice carrying none of the mental invasion she was used to with Vorthak communication, yet somehow more personal than formal Zentari speech patterns. "I've read all your papers on genetic adaptation in extreme environments. Your work is extraordinary." The unexpected praise caused her scales to shift to a slightly warmer hue, something that happened when Zentari experienced pleasure or satisfaction. She hoped the humans wouldn't notice such a personal tell. "Your research on DNA repair mechanisms has influenced my own studies significantly," she replied, releasing his hand, though she found herself reluctant to break the contact. "I'm particularly interested in your theories about human adaptability." Dr. Martinez joined the conversation, her approach even more informal than Chen's. "We're all excited to be here. This is the first time our species has had the opportunity for extended collaboration with Zentari scientists. We've heard your people's logical approach to research produces incredibly reliable results. And we've heard that human intuition often leads to breakthroughs that pure logic might miss," Sarah responded, finding the conversation surprisingly easy despite the significant physiological differences between their species. Captain Rodriguez, who had been quietly observing the interaction, stepped closer. "Dr. Vex, we want to thank you for advocating for this joint research program. We understand some species were hesitant about including humans in consortium activities." Zara glanced toward where Ambassador Kethvar and Administrator Quoleth were watching the exchange with expressions ranging from curiosity to barely concealed skepticism. "Science advances through diverse perspectives, Captain. Your species brings unique insights that could benefit all our research." Dr. Jean Wright, the linguist, had been studying the station's design while listening to the conversation. "Dr. Vex, I'm fascinated by the acoustic properties of this space. The way sound travels suggests your architects considered both Zentari and Vorthak auditory preferences. Did you also account for human hearing ranges?" "Actually, the station was designed before human inclusion in the consortium was approved," Zara admitted. "I believe you'll find the audio environment quite comfortable." As she led them through the station's main corridors, Zara found herself paying attention to details she'd never noticed before. The way humans moved as a group, maintaining individual autonomy while clearly functioning as a team. How they asked questions that revealed both technical knowledge and genuine curiosity about alien perspectives. Most intriguingly, how they seemed to communicate as much through expressions and gestures as through words. The tour brought them to the main laboratory complex where their joint research would take place. The space had been configured with equipment suitable for all three species, though Zara noticed the humans examining everything with obvious excitement rather than the critical evaluation she'd expected. "This is incredible," Marcus said, running his hands over a genetic sequencing array that could analyze DNA from any known species. "The precision capabilities are beyond anything we have access to." "And this quantum microscope," Sarah added, peering into the viewing chamber, "it's like something from our science fiction stories." Dr. Wright was examining the translation matrices that would allow real-time communication between species with different language structures. "The linguistic algorithms here are sophisticated enough to account for cultural context, not just literal translation." Remarkable. Their enthusiasm was infectious, and Zara found her scales shifting to warmer tones despite her efforts to maintain professional composure. She'd expected humans to be intimidated by Zentari and Vorthak technology, but instead they seemed to view it as an exciting challenge. Your research proposal mentioned studying the biological basis for human cultural practices, she said to Marcus. Which specific behaviors did you want to focus on first? Marcus exchanged glances with his team members, and Zara caught what appeared to be shared amusement in their expressions. Well, we thought we'd start with something that seems to puzzle other species particularly strongly. And what would that be? Human pair bonding rituals, Sarah said, with what Zara was learning to recognize as a human smile, specifically the behaviors that accompany romantic attachment. Zara's scales shifted to a slightly cooler blue as she processed this information. I see. And you believe there are biological imperatives behind these behaviors that other species haven't recognized? That other species might be missing important data because they're viewing human behavior through the lens of their own social structures. Before Zara could respond, Ambassador Kethvar's mental voice intruded into her thoughts. They want to study their primitive mating displays. How predictable. She chose to ignore the Vorthak's commentary and focused on Marcus. What specific aspects of human pair bonding do you consider most misunderstood? Dr. Wright consulted his datapad. Well, the practice of kissing seems to generate particular confusion among other species. Most consider it unsanitary or pointless.
Is it not? Zara asked, genuinely curious now.
From a biological standpoint, the exchange of oral bacteria serves no obvious evolutionary purpose. The humans exchanged those meaningful glances again, and Captain Rodriguez actually chuckled. Dr. Vex, I think that's exactly the kind of assumption your research might want to challenge. You mean there's more to it than bacterial exchange? Her scales shifted to a pale yellow, indicating intellectual curiosity. Much more, Marcus said. But rather than explain it, perhaps we could design some experiments that would let you observe and analyze the behavior directly. The suggestion sent an unexpected thrill through Zara's nervous system. She'd spent years studying humans from a distance, analyzing their behavior through reports and video recordings. The opportunity to observe their social customs firsthand was scientifically invaluable. That would be most illuminating, she said, trying to keep her voice professionally neutral despite her growing excitement. When would you like to begin these observations? How about tonight? We could start with basic social interactions and work up to more complex behaviors over the course of our stay. As the human team began discussing research protocols and data collection methods, Zara found herself studying Marcus more closely than scientific objectivity probably warranted. There was something about the way he moved, the expressions that flickered across his face, the sound of his voice when he became excited about a research possibility that captured her attention in ways she couldn't quite categorize. When he caught her watching him and smiled, she felt her scales warm again and quickly turned to examine equipment readings that didn't actually need her attention. This was going to be a much more complicated research project than she had anticipated. That evening, as she prepared for the first observation session, Zara found herself wondering what it would be like to experience human social customs not as a scientist studying alien behavior, but as a participant trying to understand emotions she'd only read about in research papers. The thought was both terrifying and thrilling in ways that her logical Zentari mind couldn't quite process, but her heart, apparently, was already beginning to learn. The observation began that evening in the station's recreation area, a space designed for off-duty relaxation that had been hastily modified to accommodate human preferences. Zara had positioned herself at a research station equipped with biometric scanners and behavioral analysis equipment, trying to maintain the clinical distance necessary for proper scientific observation. What she hadn't expected was how difficult it would be to stay objective when Marcus was involved. The human team had invited several other station personnel to join them for what they called a social evening. Dr. Chen was currently engaged in conversation with Lieutenant Kiribeth, a young Zentari communications officer who seemed fascinated by human storytelling techniques. As Zara watched, she noticed how Marcus leaned slightly forward when listening, how his expressions shifted to mirror the emotions in the stories being shared, how he used gentle touches on the arm or shoulder to show engagement and support. Her scanner registered elevated heart rate, increased neural activity in areas associated with emotional processing, and heightened attention focus. But the numbers couldn't capture the quality of attention he was giving, the way he made whoever was speaking feel like they were the most interesting person in the galaxy. "Fascinating data patterns, Dr. Chair," Wright said, approaching her research station. "Though I suspect you're measuring more than just general human social behavior." Zara's scales shifted to a defensive, cooler tone. "I'm conducting comprehensive behavioral analysis as requested." James smiled, the expression warm and understanding in a way that caught her off guard. "Dr. Vex, may I ask you something personal?" The request was so unexpected that she found herself nodding before her logical mind could object. "What's it like being the only Zentari on the station who volunteered to work with humans?" The question struck her as odd. "What do you mean?" "Well, from our research on Zentari culture, individual initiative is respected, but conformity is highly valued." Going against the general opinion that humans are primitive couldn't have been easy. Zara paused her data collection, considering his words. She hadn't thought about it in those terms, but he was right. Administrator Kwolev had questioned her decision, her colleagues had expressed doubts, and she'd received several formal inquiries about her motivations for the research proposal. "I suppose I've always been curious about behaviors that seem illogical on the surface but persist across generations," she said slowly. "Human emotional expression patterns suggest there are underlying purposes we haven't identified. Or maybe," James said gently, "some things don't need logical purposes to be valuable." Before she could process that statement fully, a commotion drew her attention back to the main social area. Captain Rodriguez had connected a portable device to the station's audio system, and music began playing. It was unlike anything in her database, with complex rhythms and harmonic structures that seemed to pulse with life. "What is this?" Lieutenant Kirabeth asked, her scales brightening with curiosity. "Human music," Sarah explained. "This particular song is from Earth, but it's the kind of music people dance to." "Dance?" The question came from Administrator Kwolev, who had arrived to observe the proceedings with obvious skepticism. Marcus stepped into the center of the space, extending his hand toward Sarah. "It's a form of expression through movement. Want to show them?" What happened next challenged everything Zara thought she understood about efficient communication. Sarah took Marcus's hand and they began moving together in patterns that seemed both planned and spontaneous. Their movements were synchronized but not identical, complementary but not mirrored. They maintained eye contact, smiled at each other, and seemed to be conducting an entire conversation without saying a word. Zara's scanners went wild. Both humans showed elevated heart rates, increased activity in pleasure centers, heightened sensory awareness, and chemical indicators suggesting joy, excitement, and something else her equipment couldn't quite categorize. "The movement patterns appear ritualistic," Administrator Kwolev noted, "but they're not precisely replicated. How do they coordinate without verbal instruction?" "Watch their eyes," Dr. Wright suggested, "and notice how they respond to each other's subtle cues." As the song continued, more humans joined the dancing. Each pair moved differently, yet all seemed to be engaged in the same fundamental activity. Some held each other close, others maintained distance while mirroring movements, but all appeared to be using motion to express something that transcended mere physical activity. When the song ended, Marcus and Sarah were breathing harder, their faces flushed, and they remained close together for a moment longer than strictly necessary. The expression that passed between them made Zara's scales warm with what she was beginning to recognize as a vicarious emotional response. "Dr. Vex," Marcus said, approaching her observation station while still slightly breathless from dancing, "are you getting useful data?" "The biometric readings are unprecedented," she said, trying to focus on the scientific aspects rather than how the physical activity had enhanced his already appealing appearance. "The neurochemical indicators suggest dancing produces effects similar to those achieved through Zentari meditation or Vorthak mental joining, but much more fun, Sarah added, joining them with a bright smile. Fun, Zara repeated the word as if testing it. You engage in this behavior purely for enjoyment? Partly, Marcus said, but it's also about connection. When you dance with someone, you're sharing a moment, communicating through movement, learning to trust and respond to each other. It's like a conversation without words, Sarah continued. You express things through dancing that might be harder to say directly. As if to demonstrate this point, Dr. Martinez approached Lieutenant Kirabeth and extended her hand in invitation. Would you like to try? The young Zentari looked nervously toward Administrator Quoleth, who gave a slight nod of permission. When Sarah and Kirabeth began moving together, the results were awkward at first, but gradually the Zentari began to understand the rhythm, her natural grace adapting to the unfamiliar patterns. Her stress indicators are decreasing, Zara noted, watching her scanner readings. And her pleasure response is increasing significantly. Physical expression releases tension, Captain Rodriguez explained. It's one of the ways humans process emotions and build social bonds. The evening continued with demonstrations of various human social customs. They showed card games that involved strategy, luck, and social interaction. They shared stories that seemed to serve no purpose except entertainment and emotional connection. They engaged in what they called casual conversation, communication that appeared to convey information but was really about establishing and maintaining personal relationships. Through it all, Zara found herself paying particular attention to Marcus. She watched how he included everyone in conversations, how he adapted his communication style to match his listeners' comfort level, how he seemed genuinely interested in learning about Zentari and Vorthek perspectives even when they contradicted his own worldview. When Ambassador Kethvar arrived to observe the proceedings, his mental presence carried its usual condescension. Privative social displays, his voice echoed in her mind. Notice how much energy they waste on non-productive activities. But Zara was beginning to see something the Vorthak was missing. The humans weren't wasting energy. They were investing it. Every interaction strengthened their group bonds. Every shared experience increased their understanding of each other. Every moment of connection built trust that would make their future collaboration more effective. As the evening wound down, Marcus approached her station again. Dr. Vex, we were wondering if you'd like to participate directly rather than just observing. The suggestion sent a spike of anxiety through her nervous system. I'm not sure that would maintain proper scientific objectivity. Sometimes the best way to understand a phenomenon is to experience it firsthand, Sarah suggested gently. You could consider it participant observation, a legitimate research methodology. The logical part of her mind knew this was dangerous territory. Becoming emotionally involved with research subjects compromised scientific validity. But another part of her mind, a part that seemed to be growing stronger with each interaction, was intensely curious about what these human social customs might feel like from the inside. What did you have in mind? She heard herself asking. Marcus smiled, and the expression made her scales warm again. Well, we could start with something simple. Maybe conversation without data collection? Just talking to learn about each other rather than for research purposes? The idea was both terrifying and appealing. All her interactions had purposes, objectives, measurable outcomes. The concept of communication purely for the sake of connection was foreign to everything she'd been taught about efficient behavior. I suppose I could spare a few minutes for informal discussion, she said, powering down her scanning equipment with hands that were less steady than she would have liked. They moved to a quieter area of the recreation space where comfortable seating had been arranged for small group conversations. As they settled into chairs that brought them much closer than her usual professional distance, Zara realized she had no idea how to begin a conversation without a research agenda. Tell me about your scales, Marcus said, solving her dilemma. The way they change color is beautiful. Does it happen consciously or automatically? Beautiful. He'd called her scales beautiful. No one had ever described any part of her appearance in aesthetic terms. Zentari appreciated functionality, efficiency, logical design. Beauty was not a concept they typically applied to individuals. It's largely involuntary, she said, trying to ignore how the compliment made her feel. Centauri scales respond to emotional states, temperature variations, and social situations. It's similar to human facial expressions or vocal tone changes. So right now, when they're shifting to warmer tones, that means something specific? She felt exposed in a way that had nothing to do with clothing. It typically indicates pleasure, curiosity, or social engagement. Good, he said simply. I was hoping you were enjoying this. The directness of the statement, combined with the warm expression in his eyes, created responses in her nervous system that her scientific training couldn't categorize. This was what humans called flirting, she realized, but understanding it intellectually was completely different from experiencing it personally. What about you? She asked, surprising herself with the boldness. How do I know if you're enjoying this conversation? Marcus leaned slightly closer and she caught his scent, warm and distinctly different from any Zenturi or Vorthak she'd encountered. Well, I'm smiling more than usual. I'm asking questions because I want to know about you rather than because I need information, and I keep finding excuses to stay close to you instead of rejoining the group. His honesty was disarming. Those are behavioral indicators of romantic interest in humans. They are, he confirmed, not backing away from the implication. Zara felt her scales shift through several color phases as she processed this information. Dr. Chen, I should point out that romantic attachments between different species present numerous biological and social complications. They do, he agreed again. But they also present possibilities that might never be explored if we always choose the logical path over the interesting one. Before she could respond, Dr. Martinez appeared with a portable screen showing data readings. Sorry to interrupt, but Marcus, you should see these biometric readings from tonight's activities. As Marcus studied the data, Sarah turned to Zara with an expression of gentle amusement. Dr. Vex, can I share an observation from a cultural anthropologist's perspective? Zara nodded, though she suspected she wasn't going to like what she heard. You're analyzing this situation like it's a research problem with variables to be controlled and outcomes to be predicted, but emotions aren't really like that. Sometimes the most important discoveries happen when we stop trying to understand everything and just let ourselves experience it. The suggestion went against everything Zara had been taught about proper decision-making. Centauri culture valued careful analysis, logical evaluation, and measured responses. Acting on emotion was considered primitive, inefficient, potentially destructive. But as she watched Marcus reviewing data with the same intensity he brought to their personal conversation, as she observed the easy camaraderie between the human team members, as she reflected on the genuine joy she'd witnessed during their social activities, she began to wonder if perhaps her species had been missing something important in their pursuit of perfect logic. Dr. Martinez, she said slowly, how does one learn to trust emotions over analysis? Sarah's smile was gentle and encouraging. Usually by starting with small risks in safe situations, maybe by spending time with people who make you feel like those risks might be worth taking. As the evening officially ended and the various species began returning to their quarters, Marcus approached her one more time. Zara, he said, using her first name for the first time, would you like to continue this conversation tomorrow? Not for research purposes, just because I'd enjoy spending more time with you. Looking into his eyes, seeing the genuine interest and attraction there, feeling the warmth that seemed to radiate from him in ways her scanners couldn't measure, Zara made a decision that defied every principle of logical behavior she'd ever been taught.
Yes, she said simply, I would like that very much.
As she walked back to her quarters, her scales cycling through colors that reflected emotions she didn't fully understand but was no longer afraid to explore, Zara began to realize that perhaps the most important things about humans couldn't be learned through observation alone. Some discoveries required participation. The next several days blurred together in ways that challenged Zara's normally precise sense of time and routine. What had begun as structured research sessions evolved into something far more personal, though she tried to maintain the pretense that she was still conducting objective observation. Marcus had suggested they explore the station's botanical gardens during their off-duty hours, claiming that humans often conducted their most meaningful conversations while walking through natural settings. The gardens were a marvel of multi-species horticulture, featuring plants from dozens of different worlds arranged in climate-controlled sections. "Tell me about Zentari Prime," Marcus said as they strolled through an area devoted to crystalline plants from the Vorthak homeworld. "What was it like growing up there?" The question caught her off guard. In her scientific career, colleagues asked about her research, her methodology, her conclusions. No one had ever asked about her childhood, her family, her personal history. "Zentari Prime is very different from this station," she began carefully. "Our cities are built with mathematical precision, each structure designed for optimal efficiency and environmental harmony. Children are educated in group settings that emphasize logical thinking and emotional control." "That sounds organized, but maybe a little lonely," Marcus observed. Lonely. The word hit her with unexpected force. She'd never characterized her upbringing as lonely, but now that he mentioned it, she could remember the careful distance maintained between individuals, the emphasis on self-reliance, the way personal feelings were considered private matters not suitable for sharing. "Zentari culture values independence," she said, but the explanation felt hollow even to her own ears. "What about friendships? Close relationships? People you could talk to about things that mattered to you personally?" Zara paused beside a flowering plant whose petals shifted colors in response to ambient light. "Zentari form professional associations and collaborative partnerships. Personal, emotional bonds are considered potentially disruptive to logical decision-making." Marcus stopped walking and turned to face her fully. "Zara, that sounds incredibly isolating." The concern in his voice, the way he said her name with such warmth, the fact that he seemed genuinely troubled by the idea of her being isolated created responses in her nervous system that she was still learning to identify. Human empathy was apparently much more intense when experienced directly than when observed from a scientific distance. "It's not isolating if it's all you've ever known," she said, though even as the words left her mouth, she wondered if that was really true. "But now you do know something different," he pointed out gently. "How does that change things?" Before she could answer, her communication device chimed with an incoming message from Administrator Quo-Willeth. "Dr. Vex, please report to Conference Room 7 for a research review meeting." The interruption felt jarring, pulling her abruptly back into the formal structure of her professional duties. "I need to attend this meeting," she told Marcus, her scales shifting to cooler tones as anxiety replaced the warmth she'd been feeling. "Of course. But Zara?" He reached out and briefly touched her hand, the contact lasting only a moment but somehow conveying more comfort than she'd received from her own species in years. "We'll continue this conversation later." The meeting proved to be exactly what she'd feared. Administrator Quoleth sat at the head of the conference table, flanked by two senior researchers from the Zentari Science Council who had arrived that morning. Ambassador Kethvar attended via holographic projection, his ethereal form flickering slightly in the artificial lighting. "Dr. Vex," Quoleth began without preamble, "we've been reviewing your research reports on human behavior. The data collection has been thorough, but we're concerned about your analytical conclusions." "In what way?" Zara asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. Council member Thariak, an elderly Zentari with silver scales and sharp red eyes, consulted his datapad. "Your recent reports suggest that human emotional behaviors serve important social and biological functions. This contradicts the established scientific consensus that emotional decision-making represents evolutionary inefficiency. My observations indicate that human emotions facilitate group cooperation, enhance problem-solving through diverse perspectives, and strengthen social bonds that provide survival advantages," Zara replied, trying to keep her voice level and professional. "Observations that may have been compromised by inappropriate personal involvement with your research subjects," Ambassador Kethvar interjected, his mental voice carrying sharp disapproval. Zara felt her scales cool to defensive blue. "I've maintained appropriate professional boundaries while conducting comprehensive behavioral analysis. Have you?" Quoleth asked, Security recordings show you spending significant off-duty time with Dr. Chen, participating in human social activities and engaging in behaviors that suggest emotional attachment rather than scientific objectivity. The accusation stung because it wasn't entirely wrong. She had become emotionally involved, had started thinking of Marcus as more than a research subject, had begun to question fundamental assumptions about the value of emotional connection, but the implication that this invalidated her research findings triggered her defensive instincts. "My research methodology has been sound," she said firmly. "Participant observation is an accepted technique for studying social behaviors. The fact that I've gained insights through direct experience doesn't compromise the validity of my conclusions." Council member Veloff, the younger of the two visiting officials, leaned forward. "Dr. Vex, are you suggesting that our species' approach to emotional regulation is somehow inferior to human methods?" The question was clearly a trap. Criticizing Zentari cultural values would be career suicide. But she'd seen too much over the past week to simply dismiss human approaches as primitive. "I'm suggesting that different approaches to emotional processing may have different advantages depending on social and environmental contexts," she said carefully. "That's not an answer," Tharex noted coldly. Zara looked around the table at the expectant faces, feeling the weight of their disapproval and the implications for her future career. She could back down, apologize for overstepping boundaries, and return to producing research that confirmed existing biases. It would be the logical choice, the safe choice, the choice that preserved her position in the scientific community. But as she prepared to speak, she remembered Marcus asking about her childhood, his concern about her isolation, the warmth in his eyes when he said her name. She thought about Sarah's kindness in teaching her about dancing, James's thoughtful questions about her motivations, the way the entire human team had welcomed her not as a research partner, but as a friend. "No," she said quietly. "It's not a complete answer because I'm still gathering data. The research is ongoing." "Dr. Vex," Quoleth's voice carried a warning tone, "the Science Council has concerns about the direction of your research. Perhaps it would be advisable to conclude this project early and return to more traditional studies. With respect, Administrator, I believe this research has the potential to significantly advance our understanding of interspecies cooperation and social adaptation. Terminating it prematurely would be a disservice to scientific inquiry." The silence that followed was heavy with disapproval. Finally, Ambassador Kethvar spoke. Dr. Kokpat, Vex, your emotional compromise is affecting your judgment. This is exactly why logical species don't allow personal feelings to influence professional decisions. And yet, Zara said, surprising herself with her boldness, human teams consistently outperform predictions based on individual capabilities alone. Their emotional bonds enhance rather than impair their collective effectiveness. "Enough," Quoleth said sharply. "Dr. Vex, you will limit your interactions with the human delegation to formal research sessions only. No more personal time, no more social activities, no more participant observation. You will complete your analysis using data already collected and submit final conclusions within 1 week." Zara felt something inside her chest tighten painfully, the thought of returning to clinical distance from Marcus, of losing the connections she'd begun to form, of going back to the emotional isolation that had characterized her entire life, was almost unbearable. "And if I refuse?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Quoleth's scale shifted to warning orange. "Then your research position would be terminated. Your access to consortium facilities would be revoked, and your findings would be dismissed as compromised by emotional bias. Career destruction, professional exile, loss of everything she'd worked for throughout her adult life. The logical choice was obvious." "I understand," she said, her voice steady despite the turmoil in her chest. As the meeting concluded and the officials filed out, Zara remained seated, staring at the conference table and trying to process what had just happened. She'd been given a choice between her career and her emotions, between logical safety and uncertain possibilities, between the life she'd always known and something entirely new. Her communication device chimed with a message from Marcus. "Hey, are you free for dinner? I wanted to show you something interesting about human food preparation rituals. The simple invitation, sent with no knowledge of the ultimatum she'd just received, somehow crystallized everything she was feeling. Marcus wasn't just asking about dinner, he was asking if she wanted to continue exploring this connection between them. Continue learning about emotions and relationships and all the messy, illogical, wonderful aspects of human experience that her species considered primitive. Zara looked around the sterile conference room with its efficient lighting and perfectly regulated temperature. She thought about her quarters, equally sterile and solitary. She considered her future career, predictable and safe and utterly devoid of the warmth she'd discovered in human companionship. Then she typed her response, "Yes, I would very much like to have dinner with you." As she walked toward the human quarters, her scales shifting to colors that reflected anticipation rather than anxiety, Zara realized she'd already made her choice. She just hoped she'd have the courage to follow through with it when the time came. That evening, Marcus had prepared what he called a home-cooked meal in the small kitchen facility attached to the human quarters. Watching him move around the space, selecting ingredients, explaining the significance of different spices and preparation methods, Zara began to understand that humans turned even basic survival activities into opportunities for creativity and emotional expression. In human culture, he explained while dicing vegetables with practiced efficiency, sharing a meal that someone has prepared specifically for you is a way of showing care and affection. The time and effort involved in cooking makes it more meaningful than simply consuming nutrition. "So the inefficiency is intentional?" Zara asked, perched on a stool where she could observe the process. "The inefficiency is the point," he confirmed with a smile. "It's a way of saying that someone is important enough to justify spending extra time and energy on them." As he moved around the kitchen, Marcus began telling her about his own childhood, his family, the experiences that had shaped his perspective on relationships and emotional connection. His stories painted a picture of a world where people supported each other through difficulties, celebrated successes together, and found meaning in shared experiences rather than individual achievements. "What about romantic relationships?" Zara asked during a lull in the preparation. "How do humans choose partners?" Marcus paused in his stirring of what appeared to be a complex sauce. "It varies, but generally it's about finding someone who makes you feel understood, supported, and excited about sharing your life with them. Someone who brings out the best in who you are while accepting all of who you are." "That seems highly subjective and unpredictable." "It is," he agreed, "but that's what makes it special. Logic can help you avoid obviously bad choices, but it can't create the kind of connection that makes life feel meaningful." As he served the meal he'd prepared, Zara realized that something fundamental had shifted in how she thought about efficiency and meaning. The time Marcus had spent cooking hadn't been wasted. It had been invested in creating a shared experience that conveyed care in ways that simple, efficient nutrition transfer never could. The food itself was a revelation. The flavors were complex, combining elements that her analytical mind would never have predicted would work together, yet somehow creating combinations that were more satisfying than the sum of their parts. "This is what human relationships are like, isn't it?" she said between bites. "Combinations that shouldn't work according to logic, but somehow create something better than either individual could achieve alone." Marcus smiled, and the expression held warmth and understanding, and something else that made her scales cycle through colors she'd never experienced before. "That's exactly what the best relationships are like." As they talked throughout dinner, sharing stories and perspectives, Zara found herself opening up in ways she'd never done before. She told him about her childhood isolation, her struggles to understand emotions, her fear that pursuing this connection with him would destroy everything she'd worked to build. "Zara," he said when she finished explaining the ultimatum she'd received that afternoon, "I would never want you to sacrifice your career for me, but I also don't want you to sacrifice your happiness for fear." "How do I know the difference?" she asked. "How do I know if what I'm feeling is worth the risks?" Marcus reached across the table and took her hand, his thumb tracing gentle patterns over her scaled knuckles. "You don't know for certain. That's what makes it both terrifying and wonderful. Looking into his eyes, feeling the warmth of his touch, surrounded by the evidence of care he'd put into preparing this meal for her, Zara began to understand what humans meant when they talked about taking leaps of faith. Some decisions couldn't be made through logical analysis alone. Sometimes the heart had to lead the way. The next morning brought crisis in the form of an emergency alert throughout the station. Zara rushed to the main control room where chaos reigned among the normally orderly operations staff. Administrator Koleth was coordinating responses while multiple displays showed incoming distress signals from a research vessel that had suffered catastrophic system failures in a nearby asteroid field. "The ship is the Endeavor's light," Lieutenant Kiribeth reported, her scales pale with stress. 12 crew members from 4 different species. They've lost life support and navigation. Estimated survival time is 6 hours. Rescue protocols are being implemented, Quoeleth announced, but the asteroid field interference is preventing transporter locks. We need a manually piloted vessel capable of navigating the debris field. Captain Rodriguez appeared at Zara's side, having responded to the same emergency alert. Administrator, human ships are designed for manual navigation in hazardous conditions. My team can attempt a rescue.
Absolutely not, Ambassador Kethrar's voice echoed through the mental link he maintained with the station. Humans are too impulsive for precision navigation.
One mistake could destroy both vessels. The debate that followed was heated, with various species representatives arguing about optimal rescue strategies while precious time ticked away. Zara watched the displays showing the deteriorating conditions aboard the disabled ship and felt her analytical mind begin processing variables and possibilities. "There is another option," she said during a brief lull in the arguments. All eyes turned to her, and she felt the weight of their attention. The asteroid field's interference affects technological systems, but it doesn't impair biological navigation abilities. A joint crew combining human intuitive navigation with Zentari mathematical precision and Vorthak mental coordination. "Impossible," Tharx declared. "Cross-species cooperation in high-stress situations is untested and dangerous." "Actually," Marcus said, stepping forward with a datapad in hand, Dr. Bex's research over the past week has documented exactly how human emotional bonds enhance team performance under pressure. The data supports her proposal. Zara felt a flush of gratitude toward him for supporting her idea, but also a spike of fear. By backing her proposal, he was associating himself with research that the Zentari Science Council had already deemed compromised. "The risk is too great," Quoeleth stated firmly. "We cannot jeopardize rescue operations based on theoretical research." "Then 12 people die," Zara said bluntly, surprising herself with her directness. "Because we were too afraid to trust each other." The silence that followed was broken by Dr. Martinez. "Dr. Vex is right. Those people don't have time for us to debate theoretical risks. They need action." "I volunteer for the mission," Marcus announced. "If Dr. Vex believes cross-species cooperation can work, I'm willing to trust her judgment." One by one, other volunteers stepped forward. Lieutenant Kiribeth offered her technical expertise. Dr. Wright volunteered his linguistic skills for communications coordination. Even Dr. Martinez, despite having no relevant technical specializations, offered to serve in whatever capacity might be helpful. Looking around at these individuals who were willing to risk their lives based on faith in her research, Zara felt something she'd never experienced before. It wasn't just scientific vindication or professional satisfaction. It was the profound emotional impact of being trusted, of having others believe in her vision enough to stake their safety on it. "I'm going to," she announced, the decision forming as she spoke. Dr. Vex, Quoeleth's voice carried sharp disapproval. "I'm the only person on this station who understands how cross-species emotional bonds enhance team performance," she replied. "The mission needs someone who can facilitate cooperation between species that normally don't work together." What she couldn't say in front of the assembled officials was that she refused to send Marcus into danger based on her theories without being there to take responsibility for the outcome. The hastily assembled rescue team gathered in the shuttle bay 20 minutes later. The plan was ambitious and risky. Marcus would pilot the vessel through the asteroid field using human intuitive navigation skills, while Zara provided mathematical calculations for optimal trajectories. Kiribeth would coordinate technical systems, and Wright would manage communications with both the disabled ship and the station. As they prepared for launch, Zara found herself alone with Marcus for a moment while the others conducted final system checks. "You didn't have to volunteer for this mission because of my research," she said quietly. "I didn't volunteer because of your research," he replied, adjusting the navigation controls. "I volunteered because I trust you. There's a difference." The distinction hit her with unexpected force. Trust wasn't about logical analysis of capabilities and probabilities. Trust was about faith in someone's character, belief in their judgment, willingness to accept risk based on emotional connection rather than mathematical certainty. "Marcus," she said, her scales shifting to colors that reflected vulnerability, "there's something I need to tell you about human customs." He looked up from the navigation console, giving her his full attention in that way that made her feel like the most important person in the universe. "I've been studying human romantic behaviors as an outside observer," she continued, "but I'm beginning to understand that some things can't be learned through observation alone." "What are you trying to say, Zara?" The directness of the question, combined with the warmth in his eyes and the knowledge that they were about to face danger together, finally gave her the courage to speak her heart. "I'm trying to say that somewhere during this research I stopped thinking of you as a subject and started thinking of you as someone I care about in ways my species doesn't have words for." Marcus stepped closer, reaching out to touch her hand in that gentle way he had. "Are you saying you've developed feelings for me?" "I'm saying I think I understand why humans consider emotional connection worth risking logical safety." Before he could respond, the shuttle's communication system activated with Captain Rodriguez's voice. "All personnel, prepare for launch. The Endeavor's light has less than 5 hours of life support remaining." The rescue mission that followed tested every theory Zara had developed about human-Zentari cooperation. Navigating the asteroid field required split-second decisions based on incomplete information, precise calculations performed under extreme time pressure, and coordination between team members whose natural instincts and communication styles were fundamentally different. Marcus piloted the shuttle with an intuitive understanding of three-dimensional space that defied logical analysis. He seemed to sense the movements of asteroids before they appeared on sensors, anticipate trajectory changes before they occurred, navigate passages that mathematical analysis suggested were too narrow for safe passage. Zara found herself providing not just calculations but emotional support, helping the team maintain focus when situations became overwhelming, facilitating communication when stress made normal interactions difficult, serving as a bridge between species whose cooperation was essential, but not naturally. "Asteroid cluster ahead," Marcus announced, his voice steady despite the sweat beading his forehead. "I need trajectory options for a field with approximately 200 moving objects." "Calculating," Zara replied, her hands flying over the mathematical modeling systems. But as she processed the variables, she realized that pure mathematical analysis wasn't sufficient. The asteroids moved in patterns that were chaotic but not random, influenced by gravitational fields and momentum transfers that created opportunities for navigation that logic alone couldn't predict. "Marcus," she said, making a decision that went against everything she'd been taught about proper decision-making. "Ignore my calculations. Trust your instincts." The look he gave her was profound gratitude mixed with something that made her scales warm despite the stress of their situation. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure that your intuitive navigation has kept us alive so far, and my mathematical models aren't designed for truly chaotic systems." What happened next was a masterpiece of improvised cooperation. Marcus piloted through the asteroid field using navigation instincts that seemed almost supernatural, while Zara provided emotional anchoring that kept the team focused and coordinated. Kiribeth managed technical systems with Zentari precision, while Wright maintained communication links that were essential for coordination. When they finally reached the disabled vessel, the rescue itself required even more complex cooperation. The Endeavor's light had lost structural integrity in several sections, making standard docking impossible. They had to use shuttle tractor beams to stabilize the ship while conducting individual extractions through damaged hull sections. The process was tedious, dangerous, and required the kind of sustained cooperation under pressure that Zara had theorized about but never witnessed. As they worked together to save 12 lives, she watched her research theories proven in the most dramatic possible way. Human emotional bonds didn't make the team weaker or less logical. They made them stronger, more resilient, more capable of adapting to unexpected challenges. Marcus's concern for the rescue victims motivated him to take calculated risks that pure logic would have rejected. Kiribeth's attachment to her human teammates pushed her beyond normal Zentari safety protocols. Wright's empathy for the trapped crew members enabled communication breakthroughs that saved precious time. When the last survivor was safely aboard their shuttle and they began the journey back to the station, Zara found herself looking around at the exhausted but triumphant faces of her teammates and understanding something fundamental about the nature of connection. "You were right," she said to Marcus as he guided them through the final navigation sequences. "About what? About trust being different from logical analysis. About some things being worth the risk even when you can't predict the outcome." As the station grew larger in their view screen, Zara realized that she was returning to face the consequences of her choices with a clarity she'd never possessed before. She knew now that the ultimatum waiting for her wasn't really about research methodology or professional boundaries. It was about whether she was brave enough to choose connection over safety, emotional truth over logical predictability, love over fear. And for the first time in her life, she knew exactly what choice she was going to make. The debriefing session following the rescue mission was unlike anything Zara had ever experienced in her professional career. The main conference room was packed with representatives from multiple species, all wanting to understand how the improvised cross-species team had succeeded where conventional approaches would have failed. Administrator Koleth sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable as he reviewed mission recordings and biometric data. The Zentari Science Council members flanked him, their scales reflecting skeptical interest. Ambassador Kethvar attended via hologram, his ethereal presence somehow managing to convey reluctant curiosity. "The mission was successful," Koleth began, "but the methods employed deviated significantly from established protocols. Dr. Vex, explain your decision to advise the pilot to ignore mathematical navigation models." Zara stood, feeling the weight of scrutiny from every corner of the room. A week ago, she would have been intimidated by this level of official attention. Now, after experiencing genuine connection and witnessing the power of emotional bonds under pressure, she felt something different. Not fearlessness, but courage born from understanding that some truths were worth defending regardless of personal cost. During the asteroid field navigation, I realized that pure mathematical analysis was insufficient for truly chaotic systems, she said, her voice steady and clear. Dr. Chen's intuitive navigation abilities were demonstrably superior to calculated approaches under those specific conditions. "You gambled the mission on human instincts over Zentari logic," Tharek stated accusingly. "I gambled on the possibility that different approaches to problem-solving might be complementary rather than competitive," Zara corrected. "And the results speak for themselves. 12 lives were saved through methods that no single species could have achieved alone." Council member Veleth consulted her datapad. The biometric readings from the mission show unprecedented levels of stress hormones combined with enhanced performance indicators. "How do you explain this apparent contradiction?" Before Zara could answer, Marcus stepped forward. "If I may, Administrator, I'd like to contribute to this discussion." Koleth's scales shifted to warning orange. "Dr. Chen, this is a Zentari administrative review." "With respect, sir, this review concerns research about my species conducted by someone whose life I trusted during that mission. I think my perspective might be relevant." The boldness of the interruption created a moment of tense silence. Finally, Koleth gestured for Marcus to proceed. "Dr. Vex's research has identified something that our species take for granted but other species seem to misunderstand," Marcus began. "Human emotions don't impair logical thinking when properly integrated. They enhance it by providing motivation, resilience, and creative problem-solving approaches that pure logic alone can't achieve. Emotional decision-making is inherently irrational, Ambassador Kethvar interjected mentally. Is it, Doctor? Martinez asked, standing to join the discussion. Dr. Vex, would you share the performance data from yesterday's mission? Zara activated the holographic display showing biometric readings from all 4 team members during the rescue operation. As you can see, stress indicators were elevated throughout the mission, which traditional analysis would suggest should impair performance. However, actual performance metrics show enhanced coordination, faster decision-making, and improved problem-solving under pressure. The data indicates that emotional investment in mission outcomes actually improved team effectiveness, Dr. Wright added, contributing his analysis. When team members care about each other and the people they're trying to save, they perform beyond baseline capabilities. Lieutenant Kirabeth, who had remained silent throughout the official questioning, suddenly spoke up. Administrator, I respectfully request permission to add my perspective as the only non-human who participated in the mission. Koleth looked surprised but nodded for her to proceed. Working with the human team changed how I understand cooperation, Kirabeth said, her scales brightening with conviction. Dr. Vex's research isn't just about humans. It's about the potential for all our species to achieve more together than we can separately. What I experienced during that mission was the difference between professional collaboration and genuine partnership. The young Zentari's words created a stir among the assembled officials. Ambassador Kethvar's projection flickered with what appeared to be agitation. Lieutenant, Tharex said sternly, you're suggesting that Zentari methods are somehow inadequate. I'm suggesting that maybe adequacy isn't enough, Kirabeth replied with surprising boldness. Maybe there are possibilities we've never explored because we've been too afraid of emotional complications. As Zara watched the debate unfold around her, she realized that something fundamental had shifted. This wasn't just about her research anymore, or even her relationship with Marcus. The rescue mission had demonstrated principles that could reshape how different species worked together, how they understood cooperation, how they approached the balance between logic and emotion. Dr. Vex, Quoeleth said, drawing attention back to her. Your research appears to have implications beyond its original scope. However, the question remains whether your personal involvement with Dr. Abichi Chen has compromised your scientific objectivity. The moment of truth had arrived. Zara looked around the room, seeing faces that reflected curiosity, skepticism, hope, and fear in various combinations. Her career, her future, her entire professional identity hung on how she answered this question. Administrator, she said, surprising herself with her calmness. I believe my personal involvement has enhanced rather than compromised my understanding of the phenomena I'm studying. The admission created a buzz of conversation throughout the room. Qualeth's scales shifted to deep blue, indicating serious concern. Are you stating that emotional bias improved your research? I'm stating that experiencing human emotional connections firsthand provided insights that external observation alone could never achieve. Zara paused, gathering courage for what she was about to say next. And I'm stating that I don't consider caring about Dr. Chen to be a bias to be eliminated, but rather a valuable perspective to be acknowledged and integrated into my analysis. The silence that followed was profound. Everyone in the room understood that she had just openly admitted to romantic feelings for a research subject while defending that admission as scientifically valid. Marcus stepped closer to her, his movement subtle but clearly supportive. Dr. Vex, he said formally, would this be an appropriate time to demonstrate the human custom you've been studying? Zara felt her scale cycle through colors representing surprise, anticipation, and something approaching terror. Dr. Chen, are you asking what I think you're asking? I'm asking if you'd like to show this distinguished assembly what human kissing actually accomplishes from a scientific perspective. The suggestion was audacious, inappropriate, professionally suicidal, and exactly what her heart had been hoping for without her mind being willing to admit it. That would be highly irregular, but scientifically illuminating, Zara replied, making her decision. After all, Administrator, the best research involves direct observation of phenomena under study. As Marcus stepped closer, Zara felt her analytical mind cataloging everything about the moment. His height requiring her to look up slightly, the warmth radiating from his skin, the way his eyes seemed to hold both tenderness and passion, the anticipation that made her scales shift to colors she'd never displayed in public. "Are you sure about this?" he asked quietly, giving her one last chance to retreat to safety. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life," she answered, and realized it was true. When their lips met, Zara understood immediately why every other species in the galaxy had failed to comprehend this simple human custom. It wasn't just physical contact or bacterial exchange or inefficient communication. It was a moment of complete vulnerability and trust, a sharing of breath and warmth and emotion that transcended every logical category she'd ever used to analyze behavior. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative and sweet, but as she relaxed into the experience, it deepened into something that sent cascades of sensation through her nervous system. Her scales shifted through colors she didn't even have names for. Her heart rate accelerated in ways that had nothing to do with stress, and her mind finally understood what humans meant when they talked about feeling complete. When they separated, she was aware that everyone in the room was staring at them with expressions ranging from shock to fascination to outright disapproval, but she was also aware that she no longer cared about their opinions in the way she once had. "Well," she said, turning to address the assembled officials while her scales still glowed with colors that reflected joy and satisfaction, "I believe that concludes my research into human romantic customs. Do you have any questions about the physiological and emotional data I just collected?" The question was delivered with such scientific matter-of-factness that several people actually laughed, including Dr. Martinez and Lieutenant Kirabeth. Administrator Quoleth looked like he was struggling to process what had just occurred. "Dr. Vex, what you've just done is completely unprecedented in the history of Zentari scientific research." "Yes, sir, it is," she agreed. "And the data suggests that unprecedented approaches sometimes yield unprecedented results." Ambassador Kethvar's projection flickered with agitation. "This is exactly the kind of emotional chaos that justifies our concerns about cross-species collaboration." "Is it chaos, Ambassador?" Dr. Wright asked mildly. "Or is it evolution?" The question hung in the air while everyone processed its implications. Finally, Council Member Veleth spoke up. "Dr. Vex, assuming your research conclusions are valid, what do you recommend as next steps for interspecies cooperation protocols?" Zara looked around the room, seeing faces that reflected the same mixture of fear and possibility that she'd been struggling with herself. These were individuals who had spent their lives within the safety of established procedures and logical protocols, being asked to consider that perhaps there were better ways to live and work and connect with others. "I recommend that we establish pilot programs for integrated teams on projects that could benefit from diverse perspectives and enhanced cooperation," she said. "I recommend that we study the emotional and biological mechanisms that facilitate cross-species bonding. And I recommend that we approach these studies with open minds rather than predetermined conclusions." "And your personal situation with Dr. Chen?" Quoleth asked. "How does that factor into future research plans?" Zara looked at Marcus, seeing warmth and support and love in his expression, and realized that she'd been asking the wrong question throughout this entire process. The question wasn't whether her feelings for him compromised her research. The question was whether she was brave enough to build a life that honored both her scientific curiosity and her emotional truth. "Administrator," she said, reaching for Marcus's hand and finding comfort in his immediate response, "I believe my relationship with Dr. Chen represents a valuable ongoing case study in successful interspecies bonding. I propose to continue researching this phenomenon from a participant-observer perspective for as long as the subject remains willing to cooperate." Marcus squeezed her hand gently. "I think I can commit to long-term participation in that research project." The laughter that followed was warm and genuine, including chuckles from officials who had entered the room prepared to terminate her career. As conversations erupted around the table about research protocols and program development, Zara realized that sometimes the most logical thing was to admit that logic alone wasn't sufficient. 6 months later, she submitted her final research report on human emotional customs with a personal addendum that would become famous throughout the galaxy's scientific community. In conclusion, the human practice of kissing serves multiple biological and social functions that cannot be adequately understood through external observation alone. Like many aspects of emotional bonding, it requires direct experience to appreciate its full significance. This researcher notes that some discoveries are worth any professional risk, and some research questions can only be answered with the heart. The report was accepted unanimously by the Galactic Research Consortium, establishing new protocols for interspecies cooperation and emotional research. But for Zara, the most important result was much simpler. She had learned that aliens might not kiss in the way humans understood it, but love apparently was a universal language that transcended species boundaries when approached with courage, curiosity, and an open heart. And sometimes the most logical choice was to follow your feelings and see where they led. Aliens don't kiss, she teased, until a human changed her mind. HFY Sci-Fi romance.